Hello and welcome to another Explorer video. Today we're checking out this white, black and green or Abzan colored Soulflayer deck, as this card has recently been added to Arena through Pioneer Masters. A 6-mana 4/4 creature, but it has the Delve mechanic, so we can exile cards from our graveyard to help pay for the generic mana cost, so we can often cast Soulflayer for just double black, assuming there's at least 4 cards in graveyard. And if a creature card with flying was exiled with a Delve ability, then Soulflayer itself will also have flying, and the same is true for additional abilities such as First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. So that's quite the keyword soup that we can potentially grant to our Soulflayer, assuming we have the right creatures in our graveyard. And then besides Soulflayer, we also get to play with a full set of Urborg Scavengers, which has a very similar effect. Instead of exiling those cards all at once, when the Scavengers enters or attacks, we get to exile a card from a graveyard and then put a +1 counter on the Scavengers, and then it also will inherit all those same keywords as the creatures we've exiled with it. So it's maybe a little bit more vulnerable to opposing removal, since our opponent can maybe answer it in response to the trigger, and then if we are maybe targeting an indestructible creature, they can still take out the Scavengers before it's indestructible, which is something you can avoid with Soulflayer. But the advantage of Scavengers is that it can keep attacking to pick up more counters and maybe accumulate more abilities, as opposed to Soulflayer, where you have to kind of lock in your abilities at the time where you're casting it. But of course, both are very important to make this strategy work, so you have that consistency of 8 creatures as opposed to just 4. And then looking at the rest of our deck, of course, we'll need ways to fill the graveyard with lots of useful keywords, and a recent addition from Aetherdrift is Ketramose, the New Dawn, which is an indestructible creature with a lifelink and menace, so that's 3 very useful keywords, especially for the Urborg Scavengers. Soulflayer doesn't get to take advantage of menace, because I guess back when Khans of Tarkir was first released, menace was maybe not a evergreen keyword that appeared everywhere, so it was not added as one of the abilities that it can gain, but indestructible and a lifelink still count. And of course, with the Scavengers, we can also gain Menace. And Ketramose is pretty good even if you hardcast it in this deck, because it can draw us additional cards if we exile cards from graveyards or from the battlefield during our turn, which also includes exiling stuff with our Scavenger trigger, or maybe with the Soulflayer if we delve. And then, of course, with Delve, we only get to draw 1 card, because it says if 1 or more cards would be exiled, but it's also a great way to have Ketramose be a creature that can actually attack or block by putting at least 7 cards in exile, so that's where exiling 4 cards at once with the Soulflayer is pretty useful. So yeah, Ketramose is great to mill and then exile, but it's also nice to just cast and then be able to eventually attack and block with it. Then our next set of keywords comes from Samut with Double Strike, Vigilance, and Haste. Haste is especially useful on the Urborg Scavengers, so we can play it, give it Haste, and then immediately attack to maybe exile a second creature, so we can give even more abilities before blockers are declared. Then we have Zetalpa with Flying, Double Strike, Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible, so definitely the creature with the most keywords that we can grant at once. And then Goldvein Hydra, another hasty creature that also has Vigilance and Trample, and also realistic to hardcast, just to maybe get some treasure tokens out of it. Could even cast it for X=0 on turn 1, just to put it in the graveyard right away, so it's maybe ready to get exiled by one of our other creatures. Now what happens if we draw some of these creatures instead of milling them? Well, we still have ways to discard them from our hand. With Bitter Triumph, we can discard a card as an additional cost to destroy a creature or planeswalker at instant speed. And Collective Brutality could discard multiple cards at once thanks to Escalate, making the opponent discard an instant or sorcery, can give a creature -2/-2, or drain the opponent for 2. So there's usually multiple modes we can select regardless of board states. Then Sylvan Caryatid does double duty as a mana creature, as well as a creature with hexproof, so if we mill it and we can give it to our Soulflayer or Scavengers, that's excellent too. And then we've got additional ways to fill our graveyard, with Grisly Salvage being the best one, as we get to reveal the top 5 to find a creature or land to keep in hand. The rest ends up in our graveyard. Stitcher Supplier will mill 3 when it enters and when it dies, so it's also fine to chum block opposing creatures just to keep filling our graveyard. Sometimes we'll actively want to take it out ourselves with our Bitter Triumph or Collective Brutality, just so we can mill more cards. and then a Seed of Hope can mill 2 cards and reveal a permanent to put into our hand, gaining 2 in the process. Just another efficient way to spend our first turn of the game. And this way we get to stick to a 3-color mana base, even though we can still potentially hardcast Samut thanks to either Sylvan Caryatid or Mana Confluence, so that can still come up. But I'm not trying to squeeze in a 4th color, even though we could maybe play cards like Otherworldly Gaze as another great way to fill our graveyard by surveilling a bunch, so that's also potentially an option. But sticking to 3 colors means we'll have a much more consistent mana base. And then we've got plenty of fast lands entering untapped early, Overgrown Tomb, 1 basic in case we need to search it up, and then Boseiju can also come in handy, maybe blowing up artifacts, enchantments, or non-basic lands. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump in some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the play with a fine hand. Supplier on 1, Bitter Triumph discards the Talpa, set up Scavengers. And hopefully it's a matchup where Indestructible is good enough to protect it. No keywords milled so far. So our opponent might think we're just a Greasefang deck. Blue-black. Can always Bitter Triumph our own Supplier to fill the graveyard some more. And an Enforcer, so rogues. I'm not opposed to casting Bitter Triumph on the Enforcer. I guess we can wait and see if they keep up a counterspell. Them milling us is actually an advantage. So I'll take 1. Try this now. Don't really want to play Scavengers while our opponent has mana up, because if they have instant speed removal, our plan kind of falls apart. Keep Supplier back on defense to block maybe another Enforcer here. Opponent's gonna bounce it. Could Bitter Triumph it in response to deny the Borrower half, but that's okay. Right, now we can Grizzly Salvage as well. Could main phase it to hit my land drop for a turn. Could just keep up all our instants instead. Alright, the jig is up, we milled Scavengers. So opponent now maybe knows to play around it a bit better. Slitherwisp, I want a Bitter Triumph. Otherwise, they get to start drawing cards. And I'll pay 3. But it is kind of a bad sign that our opponent will have more instant speed interaction in hand. Well, I guess it's time to just go for it, since we have a second copy. And then I don't have to exile my best card here in Zetalpa. Could start with something else like the opponent's creatures as well. Enforcer is enabled no matter what, so I don't think we're really stopping that. So yeah, I guess we'll just exile the Slitherwisp. That works. And then no attacks, I'll just hang back for now. Opponent has another Enforcer, this one now has Death Touch. And a Duelist. So them milling us to death could be a concern now. We're almost halfway. And Fatal Push the Supplier. So our opponent's got 2 cards left in hand. Can they answer Scavengers before we exile Zetalpa? Possible they have another Fatal Push if they're making the attack with Duelist. Maybe a Ninjutsu card. Ooh, Zareth. Well, that's bad news. So they get to just steal one of my cards now as a Zetalpa. Yeah, we're not beating a Zetalpa, are we? I mean, I can still make Scavengers into its own Zetalpa. And then eventually get lifelink. But it's gonna be a tough battle. Yeah, maybe play another Scavengers, exiling Ketramose. So we have an indestructible one to block Zareth. No, that doesn't work. So yeah, this one has to go for Zatalpa. So we have a flying blocker for the opposing Zatalpa. And this one can attack exiling the god. And then I'll gain 4 in the process. But then I still have to block Zatalpa here pretty much. Which means Zareth gets to steal something else. Opponent does not attack. Well, in that case, do we want to be careful with milling more cards? See if we get to attack. So this one has Vigilance, this one does not. Can go for Hexproof next. Eventually we'll out-trample Zatalpa. For now I'll pass. Borrower also a rogue, so that would mill me. I think we still let that happen. No attacks. Alright, in that case, good Seed of Hope. Try and find something useful, like a Ketramose. Could still Bitter Triumph Zareth. Although possible the Enforcer is the bigger threat right now. Let's just take our draw step and draw Zatalpa. So I could discard that with Bitter Triumph now, so that the other Scavengers can become a flyer as well. And even though we enable Revolt for Fatal Push, both our creatures are indestructible, so that shouldn't matter. So this is the leftmost Scavengers, which wants to gain Flying. And the one on the right probably wants to gain Lifelink. So we're making progress. I guess going for Hexproof on the leftmost Scavengers would also be decent, but we're out of Caryatids. Alright, so we're getting close. Opponent falls to 4. 19 cards remain. Not sure if they're playing other mill effects that could kill me. This might be another Zareth. Kaito this time instead. That can keep my non-hexproof Scavenger locked down.
Don't worry, Pom Poncho. I've got this.
But we're back to 30. Alright. This one also keeps picking up more counters. So I don't think there's a need to Grizzly Salvage. Boseiju doesn't really change anything. Suppose we could play Ketramose to have an extra threat. As we're about to exile a 7th card. Go face. Do we have another Menace creature available? I guess we already have Menace. Yep. So now I think we're pretty much done with keywords. Do we have trample? We do. So this one shouldn't matter too much. I'll draw off Ketramose. And Soulflayer I'm a little bit short of casting because Boseiju doesn't cast it. So your opponent has to double block, and then I guess we only trample for 3. So nothing Boseiju does to help. And we'll pass. So Kaito could lock down Ketramose, but then the scavengers can still go the distance.
Control the fight, control the outcome.
Take our turn. And could go for another Soulflayer here, but I think just an attack will do it now. Yeah, just needed every single keyword in our deck pretty much. And exile Zareth. Undraw off Ketramose. And our opponent explodes. Awesome, what a game. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We have a decent hand, just missing our Scavengers or Soulflayer. But I'll try. Can discard Zatalpa to either Bitter Triumph or Brutality. It is possible that we actually want to discard the Caryatid. I see, opponent on a red, maybe Heroic or some other aggro deck. Well, in that case our hand should line up pretty well. Can jump with a Supplier, we've got 2 removal spells. And our opponent did have to take quite a few mulligans to make this happen. So for now we can Brutality, -2, and reveal their hands. Discarding Zatalpa. And I'll hang on to the Caryatid. Take your Ancestral Anger, leave you with just a Heartfire hero in hand. And I should be able to attack. So as long as we find Soulflayer or Scavengers within the next few draw steps, we should be good to go. And yeah, can already cast it. So why not? And we also mill the Caryatid, so we'll have Hexproof and Indestructible, just in case. So it's a pretty fast clock with a double striking flying creature, and our opponent scoops it up onto the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We are missing Scavengers or Soulflayer. Do have Caryatids into Ketramose. Brutality discards Zatalpa. So I've got a decent setup for one of our 8 key threats. Might actually want to discard 1 Caryatid to the Escalate, so we can give one of those future creatures hexproof. Facing a red-black, Thoughtseize. So likely going for the Brutality. So then we don't have a discard outlet for Zatalpa anymore. Yep. Another Ketramose, not quite what we needed. Of course, can still Legendary rule it just to put one in the graveyard, but that's not ideal. And Mutavault into Blade, so this is the red-black demon deck. And our hand's not really coming together. So desperately needs a discard outlet or an additional way to fill the graveyard. Do they have the Annex here? Just a Fable. Pretty good too. Alright, Stitcher Supplier is a good starting point. Although we still need to top deck Scavengers or find our Soulflayer. But we already have some solid keywords: Menace, Lifelink, Indestructible, Double Strike, Vigilance, Haste. And we've got the mana to cast either one of them. And yeah, once we get one of those creatures in play, it's going to be hard for the opponent to really deal with it. They did have Torch to exile Supplier, so we don't get to mill 3 more. Don't get to double block Blades, I'll just single block. If we had the opportunity to double block Blade, I might have taken it just to maybe get Carroted in the graveyard for hexproof. Now Goldvein Hydra we can cast for X equals 3. And I may as well attack. I'm happy to get the treasures. If our opponent has a Bloodletter to threaten lethal with Slasher, then we would want to trade for Hydra anyways. Blade they can also equip. So now they've got a 5/5 with Menace and Death Touch, so that's going to hit me. So that can close out a game pretty quickly. So this might be our last chance to top deck. Thoughtseize is probably doing us a favor right now. And a Grisly Salvage, so want to make sure to leave up double black for when we find Soulflayer. And we did not, sadly, find the Scavengers instead. So I'll take it. And then Hydra can still attack. And then hope to be able to double block the Slasher. But now if they have instant speed removal for Scavengers, they can maybe take it out before it gets any useful abilities. Whereas they were tapped out last turn. And there's an Archfiend now too. Alright, so they are tapped out, but Reflection plus Archfiend is pretty scary. Let's see here, do we need to keep Carroted available? Might have to, so we can double block Slasher, so... Step 1 has to be Scavengers. Starting with Haste and Vigilance, if possible. So Samut makes sense. And then we can go for Lifelink, Menace, Indestructible. Find a Soulflayer, which I can still cast. Do have to be careful, because we're losing a life to our Ketramose. But yeah, I can go Soulflayer, getting another hasty creature and another Ketramose. And Ketramose only triggers once with Soulflayer, so there's no risk of dying to it here. So these can attack. And then Scavengers wanted to grab Ketramose. We fall to 1 briefly. Ketramose is now also active. And Soulflayer has Indestructible. So our opponent takes it. And our opponent dies. Wow, what a game. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play with a fine hand. Supplier into Carroted, hope to mill lots of useful keywords for Scavengers. And then Ketramose can also draw some cards. Did not mill any keywords so far. Opponent's already having a look and sees the Scavengers, so they know what they're up against. And our opponent on a white Humans deck. So, don't expect a ton of removal at least. But their deck can go incredibly wide and, yeah, present a large army very quickly. Thalia can also disrupt us. And yeah, speak of the devil. At least we don't have any non-creature spells in hand. And yeah, we'll start with another Supplier, before playing Scavengers, most likely. Or we could play Ketramose first. Although we are still missing something like Hexproof, which would be pretty useful to have on our creatures so they cannot get exiled by a Brutal Cathar. So I'm kind of tempted to play Ketramose first, so that way if we play Scavengers, we'll at least get some more cards out of it. And yeah, opponent's already running out Brutal Cathar just to get rid of Ketramose. And happy to block here. Could double block just to mill 6. Maybe that's worth it, just in hopes of milling a Sylvan Caryatid. And yeah, there's Caryatids, found Zatalpa, so pretty much everything we need. And then I'm probably okay tapping Caryatid now. So first want to go for one of our haste creatures. So Samut is an option. And then I can go for Caryatid. So we're safe against another Brutal Cathar. And if we also milled Ketramose, that would be nice, but I don't see one. Since now Lifelink is kind of the final cherry on top to make sure we can't get outraced. But once we give the Scavengers flying, we should be alright. There's another Scavengers coming in with haste and potentially double strike, so opponent needs something pretty special here. Vanguard bumping all humans by 1. And a bodyguard. That's fine. Okay, it's go time. So go for haste. Now this one's not indestructible yet, we only have the one indestructible effect to spread around. And our opponent does have some decent blockers lined up. Protecting the Brutal Cathar. But what if I still attack all out? 4-power double strike. They won't have an easy time blocking and defeating. So I think I'm still fine to go for it. Just need to make sure to select the right card for the right Scavenger trigger. So this one doesn't go for Zatalpa. This one does. So that's 8 in the air, 10 power basically on the ground. So that's probably getting chum blocked. Still possible that going for flying on the hexproof one is a little safer in case they do have another Brutal Cathar in hand. Because now it can still potentially get exiled. Although we have more mill effects in hand to maybe discover more keywords. Not in danger of dying on the way back. And our opponent scoops it up. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, and we're missing green mana. So that's a little rough. Although once we find it, you can discard Zatalpa to Bitter Triumph, and then Scavengers looks pretty good. There's even a world where we might want to discard Caryatid actively. Facing the red ley lines, so one of those aggro decks. Well, Bitter Triumph should be useful. Might want to wait for the opponent to target their creature, and another Bitter Triumph is excellent. So now with a line of discarding Caryatid looks a bit better. And yeah, let's Bitter Triumph now. I think I still discard Zatalpa first, since that's the priority. Opponent can sack Firebrand for 1 damage, but they don't get to draw. Alright, I'll just pass it back and hope to find any land here. Opponent's gonna run it back. We've got the same response. Now I could be convinced to ditch the Hydra, actually, so that we can attack with haste right away. And I don't think we really need hexproof in this matchup. Don't expect any act of treason effect stealing my creature for a turn. And indestructible is good enough to beat their burn spells. Alright, it's go time. Start with a haste creature, could also get the opponents. But the Hydra might still be better. Nah, actually, now that I think about it, I think I get the opponent's haste creatures so that we can preserve our graveyard for a potential Soulflayer. Although, to be honest, I don't know if it's really gonna matter. If we did go for Hydra, our creature would have been untapped to maybe block an opposing haste creature. So that did have some advantages. But now I guess the next Scavenger will also have Trample still, as well as Haste. So we might be able to just attack for lethal. Alright, so that's 10 in the air, plus 4 more on the ground. Monstrous Rage times 2. And another pump spell, just another Monstrous Rage. So they do get it up to 10 power. When this dies, it deals me 10 damage. So if it weren't for those bitter triumphs, we definitely would have died. But now our opponent is still gonna take 12 exactly before they get a chance to deal damage with the Charger's ability. So that worked out. Sweet. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We have some removal, Ketramose, no way to really draw cards with it. This one seems like a mulligan since we're missing our key threats as well. And this one's much better. And then probably keep one Soulflayer, one Scavengers. Could play Hydra for 0 just to put it in the graveyard. It's not crazy since we have Soulflayer and Scavengers in hand already. But maybe we'll want something else to discard later. To a bitter triumph, for instance. Alright, so Grizzly Salvage would love to find a land. Deep Cavern Bats. I could now bitter triumph, just to make sure they don't get to take my stuff forever. Or I could still salvage, and then there's a chance I can already set up either Soulflayer or Scavengers next turn, while they're tapped out. Close call. Also have to be afraid of cards like Liliana of the Veil making me sacrifice a creature. So maybe for now I'll keep it simple and just discard Hydra to answer the bat. They get to see my hands, but so be it. And then I can main phase salvage if we're about to miss a land drop. Now I could pass, could also play Scavengers. Could even go for Hydra, attack with haste, exile your Deep Cavern Bat for lifelink, but it's a little risky against mono black. So I would much prefer having Indestructible or Hexproof first. So I could still salvage, maybe we'll find a Stitcher Supplier I can cast. Alright, so Soulflayer is an option. Just to have that redundancy, didn't mill any keywords sadly. Or I could go for a white source, so we can maybe cast a Ketramose if we draw it. Close call. I think I'll go for the white source. And then Courtyard over Mana Confluence, even though the untapped land could matter. The rest is gonna miss. But that does have me worried about a potential Liliana of the Veil. Now they do have 2 mana up, so Scavengers for haste doesn't look nearly as good. So yeah, tough call. Might just be tap land pass. Opponent does the same. Yeah, we can keep hitting our land drops, eventually find a self-mill effect to give our creature hexproof or indestructible. Ooh, I see. Conquer. So that's the combo that they're maybe trying to set up. Well, in that case, I need to get lucky with this Stitcher Supplier. Milled Ketramose. So now I could go for Scavengers and Soulflayer potentially in the same turn. I think I go Scavengers, exile Goldvein. So I can attack and then go for Ketramose for indestructible. Although if our opponent has something to combo with a Conqueror, we might still be dead. And then I don't think I play Soulflayer. A 4-4 with no useful abilities isn't all that impressive. I'll keep land in hand in case they make me discard a card at random. Fel destroys Supplier, so now Scavengers could be vulnerable to a Liliana of the Veil. Or a Sheoldred's Edict. We milled the Talpa, that's great. And we don't seem to be dead yet. Just take 5. Alright, and now Soulflayer can go for Zetalpa and Hexproof. There's no haste, but so be it. And then I think I still want to exile more than 2 cards just so we potentially enable a future Ketramose to have more cards in exile. So that works. Scavenger's attacks can go for the opponent's Deep Cavern Bat. So we now have 2 creatures that can maybe block the Conqueror. So it's less likely that they can combo kill me, but still not impossible. If they can get one of those effects in play that says whenever you gain life, the opponent loses that much life, and then they need a way to enable them. Alright, looks like they don't have it, and our opponent scoops it up. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We have a fine hand. Hoping that Supplier mills some useful keywords. So far just the Scavengers, so not the best set of cards in Graveyard. Caryatid seems decent. Could also Bitter Triumph, discarding Caryatid, destroying my own Supplier, so we can play Soulflayer with Hexproof, and hopefully more keywords that we can mill with a Supplier. I don't hate it. Still not entirely sure what our opponent's playing, so we'll have to wait and see. Bishop of Wings, alright, so it's an Angel deck. So against Angels, Hexproof is useful. Giving our team flying is also going to be important to be able to block their Angels and then try and go over the top. But yeah, the Bishop of Wings is pretty scary. I think it's worth taking out as opposed to blowing up our own Supplier. And then, yeah, I could discard Caryatid, but then we just have a 4-4 Hexproof. That's not too exciting. So maybe for now I'll just pay 3 life and then postpone my decision. Another Caryatid, so now we can just play 1 out. And then maybe discard the other. A Righteous Valkyrie also worth taking out, and a Grizzly Salvage, so we'll start there. Can maybe hit a land, still play Soulflayer or Bitter Triumph. Milled Ketramose, so that's perfect. And then Swamp will do. Alright, so I can play pretty scary Soulflayer here. Although it's not hexproof yet. So I think we still Bitter Triumph first, and I might want to do it now in case our opponent can Collected Company at instant speed. And then by discarding the Caryatids, we can ensure a Hexproof, Indestructible, a Lifelink, and then I guess that's it in terms of keywords. So still would like something like Double Strike, but I guess it's a fine starting point. Opponent does keep up Collected Company. I guess we'll Xenophobe, maybe mill some more keywords. And we did. So I'll grab Ketramose. Could cast it and then Soulflayer, but I think it's time to get this out there. And then we want Double Strike, Vigilance, Haste. Menace doesn't count for Soulflayer, but Lifelink and Indestructible do. And then Hexproof, of course. And then the rest doesn't matter. Alright, and then next turn we can maybe Ketramose plus another Soulflayer. Although that one's not going to be incredibly exciting. Stitcher Supplier, I guess I'm fine if it gets ambushed, just to mill more cards. So can our Soulflayer outrace the Angels? Depending on this Collected Company, it may not. And yeah, Resplendent Angels, kind of the key, if they have ways to gain enough life. They are blocking Supplier. And we milled Samut's Hydra, perfect, so this second Soulflayer could also get in for quite a bit of damage. Still wouldn't mind drawing another land first, so we can play Ketramose and then Soulflayer. Has to be an untapped land, which I guess we don't have a ton of. Ooh, Zetalpa. That one's pretty far from getting cast. So maybe I should be patient, play Ketramose first, and then next turn Soulflayer, although this Soulflayer will get in with Haste and Trample and Double Strike right away. So we might put the opponent in an awkward spot. This one does not Trample, however, so they can chum block the one on the ground with an Elvish Mystic. So given that they're not threatening a super scary turn, I think I take the more patient approach with Ketramose. And then next turn Soulflayer draws me a card, and Ketramose can also attack right away. Opponent wants to keep the Elvish Mystic alive. So maybe they have a bigger card there trying to deploy. Maybe they just want to activate Resplendent Angel. But they might just want to double spell 3-drops, which could enable Resplendent Angel to make a token end of turn. So that could snowball pretty quickly. And yeah, Righteous Valkyrie is a pretty good starting point. So 3 mana left. Just a Llanowar Elves. Okay. And a Scavengers. Scavengers could have more upside than Soulflayer. Might be able to set up both if we draw a land. They could, of course, still have removal up here for 2 mana. So in that case, Soulflayers may be the safer play for now. Yeah, we do not have any more Indestructible in the graveyard. So maybe I do start with Scavengers anyway. Although then Ketramose doesn't get to attack. I think I still Soulflayer. And then I'll just choose one of these and leave the other haste creature in the graveyard for later. Still want to exile as much as possible for Ketramose. Found a Seed of Hope. I can still play that one, although I'll maybe attack first. And see what's up. So our opponent's just chumping. Still takes 4 off Ketramose. But yeah, they get to keep Righteous Valkyrie and Resplendent Angel, which is a pretty scary combination. So let's Seed of Hope. Leave Ketramose, just grab a Blooming Marsh that I still get to play. And then next turn Scavengers can first exile Goldvein and then maybe Ketramose. So we're assembling a nice little army, but don't count out the Angel deck, especially with the reconstruction for 3. Although our opponent got pretty unlucky only finding a Jada, so that's probably the luck we needed to get there. But yeah, that also explains why they wanted to keep their elves alive to set up a bigger reconstruction. And there we have it. Awesome. So yeah, we even got to rank up with this Soulflayer deck. I was more impressed by the Urborg Scavengers, to be honest, than the Soulflayer itself, just because you can keep exiling more creatures going forward, so it can keep growing and keep accumulating more keywords even if you mill them later in the game. But of course, Soulflayer has its advantages, being invulnerable to opposing removal if you've got the right keywords to exile right away, and of course being a little cheaper if you've got the full graveyard for Delve. But of course we're very happy to have all 8 of these creatures in the deck, and that's often what's necessary to push kind of a fringe, kind of janky strategy to the next level, is adding that extra playset of cards with a similar effect, so you can have a much more consistent experience as opposed to sometimes getting very lucky and pulling off an amazing combo, but it just doesn't happen reliably enough. Now with both Scavengers and Soulflayer, that's no longer a concern. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. I want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.